I'm so excited to see you all and so excited to welcome Karen Jo Torjeson, who kindly is offering her live presence to us, which is such an honor. Um, I wrote a little piece here. I'm just going to read a little bit so I can really honor Karen's credentials and what she has done for us. Um, So Karen is a pioneering scholar. I would call her one of the godmothers of um, this research that was so hidden and so covered up and so kept from us, to the point where I think when I first began um, exposing myself to people like Karen, I felt so ripped off. I went through a really major phase of being like, what the actual? This was hidden here all along. I knew it from the time I was a little girl, and now here it is right in front of me, thanks to this really robust uh, research and commitment. So Karen's work kind of like it reflects the organic nature of the early church and how it was actually um, defined by like a Greco-Roman world. And she's going to talk more about that. But when I was first introduced to Karen's work, it was through this book, When Women Were Priests. And when I invited Karen to come on, I actually sent a picture I have of Ian, my beloved. Um, he's got our baby Francis, who's 9 now. And Francis is laying on Ian's chest, and Ian's reading this book. And I took a picture of it because it was basically like, you know how they say life goals, right? My beloved partner was educating himself, grew up French Catholic, was educating himself about this history with his son on his chest, which is kind of like the sexiest thing I can think of. So anyway, without further ado, I just want to welcome you, Karen. We're just going to have a really informal conversation today with room for questions at the end. So, Karen, if you want to begin by just maybe start with how you ended up being drawn to this research to begin with.
Okay. I'm so delighted that there are faces and presences here. I was thinking of it just as a two-way interview out into space. So thank you so much for being embodied. Actually, it's easy. I told this story at dinner yesterday, so yeah, I've got it pretty fresh. My first teaching position was in Germany, and I was still just even finishing my dissertation. And I can't even remember the title of my dissertation, which was also published. But my specialty, what I was developing, was expertise in early Christianity. So the field that I was in Germany, which is fairly patriarchal, was called patristics, the study of the fathers. And that's what I studied, their theology, their lives, and the formative period of Christianity. To do that, I had to, of course, learn, I had to learn German, but I also had to learn Greek and Latin. And what that meant was women weren't accepted into seminaries to get a theological degree until the 80s. And so I was one of that first wave who had developed that expertise. So when I came back from Germany, I learned about the big controversy within Christianity over whether women could be in leadership, women be priests, could women be bishops, were they, and so on. And the arguments for the fact that um, the church believed that they were not allowed to be in leadership and not allowed to be bishops and presbyters. They, I'm sorry, at this age, I can lose a train of thought, and that's why I have help here. So what I want to say is that when I came back to the States, I realized I could enter the fight. Mm-hmm. The opposition, the arguments for women being absent came from all of these texts that I now could read in Greek and Latin. And so I used that tool to enter the fray. And it was scary. It was exciting. It seemed overwhelming. But what happened in the US was that women in the 80s wanted to know everything about women. It didn't, doesn't matter, conservative, liberal, doesn't matter what branch of Protestant Catholic, doesn't matter what religion, women wanted to know about women's history. And so publishers were right there. And after I gave my first paper at an academic conference in the States, because I was moving in this direction, I had 3 publishers come up to me and say, "Do you have a larger manuscript? We'd like to publish something like this." And that was when I realized, okay, there's tremendous resistance in the university to these perspectives, to these arguments, to this whole new vision. But in the popular press and in the world of women, everyone's ready to go. And so when I put together a number of articles I had written into a draft of a book, my publisher said, "We'll publish this. It's a solid academic book, but we would like to make it a crossover book." And a crossover book is one that is academic, but is written for a larger audience and is usable for a larger audience. And he said, "That'll probably take you longer." It took another 3 years, but I was really clear. My goal was I had already gained my chops, you might say, for being an academic, because my dissertation was published in a German series. So that said, okay, she's a real scholar. So I could take the risk, because women who were publishing on women's issues were, you couldn't get a job at a university with that on your resume in those years. So that's how I got launched. And what I did is during that period, I ended up speaking a lot in Christian churches, women's groups, and that really affected how I was writing it and how I was explaining it, because I was in conversation with women who lived out women's roles and who had a deeper vision of what was really going on in history and had that sense that we've been betrayed.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So that leads me definitely into just an intuitive question here around what it was like for you as you began doing this research and uncovering what you began to uncover, and how perhaps you were formed. You're formed as a little girl, moving through the world, and then you move into the academy, which of course is very, it's got a lot of masculine energy there. And so there you are, uncovering some of this treasure. What were some of the things that you felt personally, like when you're saying, using the word betrayed? That's a word that I felt like, that's a word that I would use for my own self as I began to awaken. uh, to the history. So I just wanted to ask what maybe uh, what feelings came up for you as you're noticing, oh my goodness, look at this.
No one's ever asked that question. That's a profound question, one worth spending time with. We'll do that after. Okay, what flashes first for me is, and it needs to be an autobiographical piece. I grew up between the years of 8 and 12 in Mexico and went to Mexican school. And so I had a cross-cultural life very early on. And because my family weren't, in like military or diplomatic or missionary, there wasn't a really strong lens through which I would interpret everything. So that meant that I was really open. My heart was really open. And so children have that capacity. They see with their heart, I guess, and so that critical mind is just receiving new things and not creating boundaries. That was so important for me then when I went on to graduate school or a school, because I knew what another culture was like. And when I was listening to all the things I was being taught about women and women's roles and women's virtues and all, I knew that what was happening is that these people were only projecting their own culture. Mm-hmm. They had no idea about another culture. So I knew in a deep way that the world that they built was artificial and it was constructed only in terms of their own values and their own social order. And so, and even more, the scholars imagined the ancient world to be scholars like themselves, in their sequestered in their offices. So that there was always that underground. There was always that underground. Then another piece that was really helpful in this cross-cultural dimension is, as a child, as a girl child, I was in Mexico growing up. And so I knew machismo. I knew the Mexican notions of gender because I felt them in my body. And I felt them in terms of the way men spoke to me or looked at me. And so that turned out to be really, really valuable, because in order to understand what women were experiencing in the Greco-Roman world, I needed to teach myself anthropology, because I wasn't trained in anthropology or even sociology. I was trained in reading ancient texts. And so I found the cultural system it's called an honor shame system. It's in the Mediterranean still. That was the context for how women were judged. And I knew what it was like in my body. It was way more than academic knowledge. I got it. And that was such a powerful tool.
So as you were researching, something that came to mind, the way I operate is I time travel, like not literally, but
yeah, I get it.
In a real imaginal way, in order to observe different eras and epochs of time. Because a lot of my work it's spent around threshold moments in history where there's a lot of friction and energy that can be worked with, and how much it reflects into our own time right now and echoing. So when you began your research as someone who's academically trained in the text, but then you're actually almost looking through the eyes, as
Mhm.
what it sounds like you're telling me. When you
Yeah.
began to sort of notice this honor shame culture, first of all, it would probably be helpful for people to know about this culture because a lot of us don't know that
Mhm.
where the root systems of this,
Yeah.
even purity, you know, uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, where all of this comes from and how some of it was, definitely in your research connected to the Greco-Roman and then the root systems of being in Babylonian exile, for instance, and historically being when someone is oppressed, when a people are oppressed, they often more hyper moralize themselves over
Yeah.
and
Right.
above their
Right.
captor, and so
Mhm. Mhm.
purity becomes a piece there. But
Mhm.
this is also taking place in Greco-Roman culture, which is important for people listening, which isn't the root systems of which are not Christian, right? So that's maybe
Right. Right.
important to talk about because we conflate it all right now,
Right.
um, if we're not historians or if we're not. So maybe speak about what is the honor shame culture that you're
Mhm.
speaking about, and then
Well,
what would it like to look through those eyes and to feel that?
yeah, it's really interesting, and it was very strong in Italy, for example, when I visited when I was in my 20s and 30s, and it's changed dramatically going back what 80 years later, I guess. I mean, in my uh, in the eighth decade. What the key is, how does women's sexuality get defined?
Mhm.
Okay, in an honor shame society, a woman's sexual intactness is a really important possession of the family. So if a woman's honor, which is her sexual limitedness, is offended, the whole family's honor is diminished. So the status of the males depends on that sexual control of the females. So from that comes then rules about, which were very strong in Roman Empire. There are treatises on, how long your skirt has to be, how tight your clothes are, how much makeup you wear. I suspect that age difference would mean that none of you, see, I grew up in the 50s culture, and that was really strong in America. All those ways, there were good girls and bad girls, and the way you showed your sexuality put you in one category. And that is in this honor shame culture of the ancient Mediterranean, and is in Roman gender values and in Christian gender values too, as they were absorbed. So what that work comes down to now is, okay, so how do we protect a woman's sexuality? Well, the first thing would be, let's see if we can keep her from going out of the house. So the public sphere becomes the male sphere. And women shouldn't be in that male sphere unless they're accompanied by a male or servants, or because it's not their space and they are sexually vulnerable in that space. And that's what we call it, the hazing, right, is about. When the wolf whistle when girls go by, or comments, it's all to say you don't belong here. This is our space, and we can do what we want here. So that has was the foundation for women cannot be leaders, because that puts them in public space. It's male space, and it's dangerous for them. And so you'll see, while you'll read in the, early Christian writers, in the fathers, all kinds of tirades about, both how a woman should look in terms of her sexuality and where she can go. So just to think one step farther with you on this is the Christian churches met for the first 3 centuries in homes. They were house churches. They met or they met, if they were poor, they met in the office, the shop, I mean, that fronted on the street. And what that means in terms of the gender system, the church grew up in women's space, in private space, in domestic space. And in the ancient world, women's space also included the economic, because either the crafts, or even if there's fields, a woman who is the mistress of the household sends the workers out to the fields. And so leadership by women was natural in those early centuries, because they were playing their normal role, being educators, being disciplinarians, being teachers, being nurturers, being healers. And so they were natural leaders. So one simple clue to this is that the Roman intellectuals, who were disgusted that this sect was gaining so much ground and so popular, it's ridiculous. The things they believe they're absurd. And you go to their meetings, and what do you have? They're only women and children. So that was a way of critiquing Christianity, because women were so prominent in it and played such a major role.
So it's really important here, I think, to note for anyone who's listening or anyone who's here who isn't familiar, right now we're in a kind of a danger zone as we shift this epoch that we're in to forget some really important things. And one of those is how long it took, right? How long it took in this story arc that you're specifically looking at, before the church as we know it became Romanized, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when people, even to the right now, for instance, I see so many things on Instagram consistently about the Roman invasion of Britain, just as an example, which is like mid first century Common Era, right? And inside of that, a lot of people today are assuming that it was the Christian church that was invading, so that the Romans are invading Britain, and they think of it as Roman Catholic.
Oh, interesting.
But
Okay,
there's
yeah.
centuries between that point and the point where this occurs,
Right.
where the place where you're working in, let's talk about the reason why they're gathering in houses. Just so it's very clear for people who maybe haven't spent time in the history of this time period, and how much is on social media today that conflates the centuries and
Oh,
conflates so
interesting.
much
Uh-huh.
of
Uh-huh.
the root systems of this.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are you kind of, where do you think this goes? Give me
Just to
some
speak
clues.
about why are they gathering in households, right?
Okay.
When you're
Yeah.
saying the early Christian
Okay.
church gathered in
Yes.
households, we've got a lot of people may not know why that is or what
Right.
the implications of that
Yeah,
even.
you're right. You're right. You're totally right. Yeah. I mean, the first thing to say is Christianity was illegal,
Yes.
because it wasn't a traditional Roman religion. It didn't particularly honor any of the Roman deities, male or female. Um, it didn't seem to give quite enough what respect and attention to the rulers who ruled under these gods. Okay, so they, in fact, they called themselves the people. And you can see early on that there's this impulse in Christianity to become a people that is not only just a community, but like a state, like a government. And sure enough, right? It became that during the medieval period. We had a Christian state and we had a Christian ruler in the Pope and so on. But in those early periods, the Christians were, so they met in secret. So that was helpful. There's no marking on a household about what's going on there. So that made it safe. It was a religion that was spreading among the lower classes and the poorer classes, and it created support and networks and drew people together and gave them that that much greater strength that I belong to this community and the community is going to stand up for me and protect me. So it filled a lot of valuable functions. The Christian church, the Christian communities took on responsibility to care for the sick in the community, to take care of orphans. So that's all part of that, what it meant for the early Christians to meet together. It didn't really become a legal religion until after Constantine. Mm-hmm. And there were other private religions too, besides Christianity, that were kind of below the line.
Good. Thank you for clarifying that. I definitely want to speak about some of the women that you work with in the book, like Theodora,
okay.
Livia. Some of these, I'm just like knowing what I know of the book. I'm just pulling those out from my memory because I really want to speak about the women before I ever bring up Paul. The women get to come first.
Yeah. Well, so here's just a useful anecdote. We know that women were prominent and women were leaders from the Roman perspective in this Christian movement. In the New Testament, there are stories about Jesus traveled with the 12 disciples and some women. So they're kind of like mentioned later, and you picture the disciples crowding around Jesus, and you picture these women that are kind of, hangers on. But that's not the case. The women that were with Jesus traveling were women from the upper classes, not the lower classes. And they were women who were there. They helped support the campaign. They were there to contribute money. One of the women, Susanna, was the wife of Herod's steward. So, and Herod was the ruler in Israel at that time. And so, for example, the group, the apostles and Jesus are moving together into a new town, and there's some resistance, and there's violence, and so Susanna will then step in and say, what seems to be the problem here? Oh, well, my husband is the steward for Herod, and he would be very disturbed to learn that you're offering this kind of resistance to this group. So I suggest you just think about that. So I've given a little drama to it, but the point is that the women belong to the upper classes. They were there as protectors and leaders and influencers. Mm-hmm. That's what that hidden history is. I mean, like for a simple thing in terms of these hidden histories, uh, you can often, when you look with the right lens, you can just see them lying on the surface. Okay, so there are all these regulations in the New Testament. Women may not baptize, women may not teach, women may not be in authority, and so it's read as though it was a law book. But if you read it as a book of culture, as a historian would read it, then it's really clear. Women were doing all these things. And there was some opposition to it. So there's a controversy. So what's the controversy about? And who's on which side and why? All of that can come just from the simple fact of moving away from the idea of it's a sacred text to it's a community's history. And then you start to see the women. And the amount of resistance to women indicates they were very powerful.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of Peter's response to Mary Magdalene in the Gospel of Mary.
Yes.
It's like an angst that just, it like permeates the history of this. And for me, um, once this is kind of another personal question before we get into Theodora, and it's more about like once you began, I don't know at what point you began to notice, like read between the lines, so to speak, right? And notice that once you start reading between the lines and really seeing this all come to life, right? As opposed to it being one dimensional, like as a scholar of text, right? Um, at what point did you have to um, heal yourself? Like at what point when you're looking at this and really feeling what the impact of this has had? Like there's some women inside the Wellspring who do not identify as Christian, but they do know at the very least that they are a recipient of a lineage, right? And it's difficult to even know sometimes what to do with that lineage when you start to notice the impact, the way it was designed, and the root systems that you're speaking about, the Roman and the Greco-Roman root systems as it pertains to women. But was there a point when you're like, did you say, you bastards? Like, did you get to the point where you're like, you see it, right? And you uncover
Yeah.
this, and then you start to feel the impact of it on your own story or the story of
Yeah.
women around the world, really. How this impacted the way we erased this, the way it was hidden, the way it was channeled into one particular narrative
Yeah.
that is impacting us even as we speak. Or like the
Yeah.
globe right now is really impacted by this story.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, where the point of contact was with my professors. Okay, because that was the, what, flesh on flesh. That was where the conflict was. And you felt so helpless because, I knew, they'd never believe. You could put whatever arguments, you could be however persuasive, you could be, a brilliant historian, but they wouldn't be persuaded. And it was that just this wall that you couldn't touch, you couldn't make an impact on it. And that's where the anger and the impotence, came together. And where that led was to women, because women were believing, women were getting it, women were seeing it. And so that's where I felt strength. I felt that I felt impact. I felt safe. I mean that this this is this is just an example of, yeah, what it means to go into the lion's den, I guess. But when after my book came out, uh, I was nervous about opening my mail each time because I was afraid there might be a bomb. Mm-hmm. And it's on one level, it's sort of irrational, but on the other level, it's not. It was my psyche grasped how much of a confrontation that book was, just as a little book, and what danger it put me in by having published it. And another part of me knew, well, you're really getting carried away here, but the fear was so real and so true. I mean, it was a revelation of just how much resistance there was to change in the way that women were viewed and what they were welcome to participate in.
Can you speak about some of the early leaders that you know about, the early female leaders?
Yeah, there's just little clues, but I think my let's see. Oh, there's just so many to choose between. Lydia would be an example. And she was an international trader in the one of the most precious luxury goods in the empire. So she was something. Mm-hmm. And she was Paul's protector. She was Paul's guardian. She was the one who funded Paul, encouraged him, and made his career possible because there was that social distance, that same social distance. She was a patron. And in the letter that Paul wrote to the Romans, he hadn't been, he was planning on going. And there's 22 names of people, he says, greet this person, greet that person, greet that person. And that's in that's all in, these are all the house churches in Rome that he's familiar with. They're in touch with each other. Of those, one third were women. So 30% of the leadership in the city of Rome, in the capital of the empire, were women. Mm-hmm. And she was one of those. And then another one who's so mysterious and just really intriguing. So there's among that group, there's Junia and Andronicus. And Paul said they were in prison. I met them in prison. They were already there in prison, and they are apostles. He gave them the title of apostles. He put them on the par with Jesus' disciples. So it's a team, and the woman is equal in power, and it is a on-the-road ministry. They travel, they preach, they baptize, and they get imprisoned because it's an illegal religion, and there's opposition. Well, Junia underwent a sex change operation in the 12th century, where she became Junius. Mm-hmm. a male name. So what's happening is the copyist in the 12th century, the sexism is much greater even then, said, well, that can't be. They're called apostles. That must be two men, Junius and Andronicus. And it wasn't until Bernadette Bruden, who was a feminist scholar of the last century, did a study and discovered there is nowhere, anywhere in Roman history and in Roman literature and Roman lists, there is nowhere the name Junius. It's a female. And so the translations now show a female in in companionship with a husband, probably, who is called by Paul an apostle, the apostle Junia. That's another favorite.
Yes, that's so fascinating, that these women's names throughout the centuries were switched, right? Switched from Theodora to Theodore, from, you're saying, like,
Yeah,
it's an easy switch, Joan to John, like these switches
yeah,
that some of which are very, actually very historical, right? And then you have all these folk fossils, which is something I'm very fascinated with as well, right? Once you start to move into the stories of the people as well, you start to get a different,
oh, all the women. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like one woman that I'm super fascinated with is Thecla, right?
Yeah.
Thecla, right? And of course, we have folkloric stories about her where sea lions and lions lay down in but there's
Yeah.
something, I always find something buried inside of those stories that rings so true, um, about the time, and it gives you a different a feeling of the time you're in, as opposed to just this like one dimensionality that we have if we're just being scholarly,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so thank you. Thank you. I like to mention their names too, these women that you're mentioning, because I feel like they're all kind of gathering around us right now from the many, many, many centuries, the wisdom that they that somehow got put forth in different little pieces of manuscripts and oral tradition, and that's all
Yeah.
passed down to us now. And you're so much a part of that lineage. Um, I know the work that you have done has been more impactful than you might realize. So I just want you to carry that.
Thank
Um,
you.
it really is impactful and brave, um, pioneering all of those words. I think if there's anything else that you might have to say about this would be the time to just, you could close, and then we'll open it up for questions if anyone has any. So.
All right. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Um, it's well, it's interesting. I as a scholar and I as a woman am so excited about all the, now I'll call it, we've done a lot of historical work, but now there's so much wonderful creative work
Mhm.
being done on women's stories, women's lives, art. So what I feel now, like I'm in the middle of this wonderful new world where what a woman's spirit
Mhm.
is rising and it again, it's it crosses everything, it crosses class lines, it crosses ethnic lines, it crosses such a huge variety of religions. And it's inspiring. It feels so alive and so energizing. And it's it's really exciting what this generation is doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm greatly nourished by it. The
Beautiful.
woman is nourished by this generation in a way that it wasn't in the last generation when we were fighting so hard. We were all
Mm-hmm.
worried.
Well, we won't forget. We won't forget. We know how hard earned it was, so thank you for that. Um, I wanted to just what came to mind as you were saying that is I just wanted to mark, and maybe we could hold this a little bit before questions, that it's no surprise to me that these young people who are on a flotilla going to say enough is enough, the way we're treating children in this world right now. The young people risking a lot. They're, risking themselves. Are on board a boat called Madeleine, and the boat was named after a fisherwoman from Gaza, and it's Magdalene. It means the Magdalene. And so it is no surprise to me that this little boat that has rocked the world this week is named after her. And I know that this is more mysterious. I think the reason why we might have the trailblazers experienced so much pushback is the mystery of this is so powerful. It moves beyond control and control of just clerical control and so yeah, I just wanted to honor that boat and the name of that boat, just symbolically bringing what is right to bring to any human on this planet and that needs aid. So, um, with that, we'll open it up for any questions you might have. This is a great opportunity. We didn't even get to Paul and any of the complications that he brought. Lydia supported him, and then here we are, interpreting him in all sorts of ways, right? That became very problematic for us. So anyway, the floor is open. Have at it.
Thank you, Karen. I've been in and out because our technician arrived right when the call happened. So
All right.
I have missed pieces, and I don't know whether you even talked about this type of thing, but I'm really curious about things like liturgies and the shape of worship and the way space was held when in the sort of pre-patriarch when women were in leadership. If do we have do we know do we know what the shape of those things were like?
Yeah, there's clues for this period. There was a group who would bring special bread they baked for Mary as their ritual coming together. So there's a whole cult of women back in there, and they're connected to probably the goddess of the earth. That's probably what that larger framework is, and the baking of the bread and the sacredness of that. So that's just one thread. There is a whole group. Well, really, it's larger than a group. There was a movement, a spiritual movement, a Pentecostal type movement, a prophetic type movement that began quite early in the 2nd century and was quite widespread for several centuries, led by 2 women prophets. Founded by them, the churches were, built according to their visions, and they were very influential and very brave in their martyrdom, and they were persecuted when the church moved into the phase of being more like a state church, and they were then declared heretics, and they were persecuted, and their properties were confiscated. But they had been thriving for 3 centuries by then.
Are there resources that I can look at to because I would love to hold space that is in that comes from those traditions.
Well, that you could look up just by starting with Montanist, which was, and see, this is how the patriarchy works, right? Their follower was Montanus, and the movement was named for him.
Montanist?
Montanist. Montanist.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So that would be a good place to start.
Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm calling in from my phone. I hope I'm heard.
Yeah, you sound clear.
Okay, and I'm at work, so if I have to leave quickly, it's because there's a work obligation. I just want to thank you. I'm a member of the Association of Roman Catholic Women Priests, and your research has been hugely important for us, and especially identifying where there might be women who may have had Episcopal authority.
Yes.
And such as Theodora. And so that's absolutely wonderful. Another thing is, and this is a confession, I'm watching, it's a live stream series called Torjeson, and it's from a very evangelical, patriarchal perspective, but it's extremely popular worldwide. But the impact of women like you, the way Mary Magdalene is being conveyed, even by an evangelical Christian, is amazing. The women don't show up at the Last Supper, but she has insight about what's going on with Jesus that is pretty clear that the male disciples don't seem to know anything about. And so it's just fascinating to me that that wouldn't have showed up. I mean, if you remember, like Jesus Christ Superstar and all that other stuff, as the evolution of herself as amazing. But I just really appreciate your research, and I'm very grateful. I also wanted to mention, somebody asked about a resource, Jesus Before Christianity, that came out a few years ago. Is a really good, it talks about the different Jesus associations that were going on before, Constantine really took over, and it shows that there were women leaders, and that things were being done differently in those households than others. And most conventional Christians think of the book of Acts. There was only one Jesus association. You find that in the book of Acts. This isn't true. There were many, and as we're finding out through the texts that are not in the New Testament that are available to us right now, like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Philip, that we're seeing that there was all kinds of Jesus associations, and that we now can make ourselves available to them. There's a video series called Early Christian Texts that people can watch with Shirley Paulson, and that would be another great resource. I just wanted to share those. So thank you again, Karen. It's interesting. My name's Karen too, and we're pioneers in the women ministry, and so, I was ordained in 2018 in Detroit.
Oh,
And I'm
fantastic.
an ordained Roman Catholic woman
Ah,
priest and in apostolic succession. Even
no.
though the Pope disagrees with me, we know
Well,
what
and
Sophia
Catholics are
Christa has
calling
done in
you,
us.
calling the
Yes,
women to
uh-huh.
be their
Yeah,
priests. It's fantastic.
yeah.
Yep.
And I'm sure we're all praying for what's happening in the United States and
Thank
Los
you.
Angeles right
Thank
now.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Deliver us from evil.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. Thank you.
Do we have time for one more, Karen? Is that
Sure.
okay?
Yeah.
If there's anyone else.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, the next thing it would be fun to do is just go sit with you and hear your stories. So thank you. Thank you for
Yes.
being here.
Thank you so much for joining us and for all of your beautiful work. And if you don't, you guys, if you don't have this book, it's definitely an important book just to have. I'm consistently picking it up and taking it because I remember something and I'm doing something else, and I'm always going back to it. And yes, thank you so much for all of your
Thank you.
work and for your bravery. And we love you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Karen.